do this quick 10-minute sermon. Early New Year celebrations. The earliest recorded festivities in honor of New Year's arrival date back some 4,000 years ago to ancient Babylon. For the Babylonians, the first new moon following the vernal equinox, the day in late March with an equal amount of sunlight and darkness, heralded the start of a new year. They marked the occasion with a massive religious festival called a kitu, derived from the Sumerian word of barley, which was cut in the spring. That involved a different ritual on each of its 11 days. In addition to the new year, a tiku celebrated the mythical victory of the Babylonian sky god Marduk over the evil sea goddess Tiamat, and served an important political purpose. It was during this time that a new king was crowned, or that the current ruler's divine mandate was symbolically renewed. Throughout antiquity, civilizations around the world developed increasingly sophisticated calendars, typically pinning the first day of the year to an agricultural or astronomical event. In Egypt, for instance, it was the year beginning with the annual flooding of the Nile. And if you know anything about the flooding of the Nile, because I watch all kind of Animal Planet, you know it's a desert land and it's a dry land. Things die and only the strong survive. So when the annual flooding of the Nile came, then that symbolized new growth. The trees, things could drink, things could eat, and they could pick up their harvest. And it coincided with the rising of the star Sirius. The first day of the Chinese New Year, meanwhile, occurred with the second new moon after the winter solstice. However, did you know that in order to realign the Roman calendar with the sun, Julius Caesar had to add 90 extra days to the year 46 BC when he introduced his new Julian calendar. The early Roman calendar consisted of only 10 months and 304 days, with each new year beginning at the vernal equinox according to tradition. It was created by Romulus, the founder of Rome. In the 8th century BC, a later king, Numa Pompilius, is credited with adding the months of Januarius, which we call January, and Februarius, which we call February. Over the centuries, the calendar fell out of sync with the sun, and in 46 BC, the Emperor Julius Caesar decided to solve that problem by consulting the most prominent astronomers and mathematicians of his time. He introduced the Julian calendar, which closely resembles the more modern Gregorian calendar that most countries around the world use today, including the United States. As part of his reform, Caesar instituted January 1st as the day of the year. Julius Caesar is given his due by creating January 1st as a day of celebration to turn over a new leaf. However, in Isaiah 43:19, in the King James Version, it says, "Behold, I will do a new thing. Hallelujah. Now it shall spring forth. Ye shall not know it. I will even make way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert." Now remember, I was talking about the Nile being overflooded. So that was Egypt's new year. Mm-hmm. Julius Caesar had January 1st as his new year to clean up his past. But now in the Message Bible, it says, this is what God says. The God who builds a road through the ocean, who carves a path through pounding waves, the God who summons horses and chariots and armies to lie down and then can't get up. They're snuffed out like so many candles. You know that past that you want to look back to and try and fix? The God who summons the horses and armies to lie down, they can't come back. They can't come and get you. They're snuffed out like so many candles. Forget about what's happened. Don't keep going over old history. Be alert. Be present. I'm about to do something brand new. It's bursting out. Don't you see it? There it is. I'm making a road through the desert, rivers in the Badlands. Look at your neighbor and say, forget about what's happened.
Forget about what's happened.
Forget about it. It can't come back. Now, tell your neighbor, there it is. Don't you see it?
There it is. Don't you see it?
Man's new year was formed after a mortal who seemed not to be able to get it together, so much that he fell out of sync with the sun. Perhaps man used the S-U-N, but the S-U-N represents the S-O-N. So man fell out of sync with the S-O-N and ended up trying to add 90 days to his schedule his schedule, see, or his calendar, trying to make up for lost time. We all know that time spent is time gone. You can't live in the past. Yesterday happened. You can't back up. We don't have a time capsule so we can go over and do it again. It's gone. Some of us have things we're supposed to do, places we were supposed to go, money we were supposed to save, messages we were supposed to preach, but somewhere along the line, our time got messed up. We were preoccupied with something else and missed our mark. Because of it, some consequences were worse than others. Some doors have been closed that should have still been open. Monies have been spent that should have been saved or used for other things. Other persons had to make do, quotation, make do, because you weren't in your place to complete your assignment. Jobs were filled that should have been yours, but because you were preoccupied with something else or didn't believe that it belonged to you, you didn't even apply. You didn't follow through. Some of us still have been walking around with a defeated spirit because life itself and all that the hand that it dealt you. Now, the mortal man of old was trying to get back in line with the S-U-N. But we who are in Christ are in sync with the S-O-N.
Yes.
Now, the Holy Writ of God tells us in 2 Corinthians 5:17, therefore, if any man be in Christ, he is a new creature.
Yes.
Old things are passed away. Behold, all things become new. So quit looking at your past for answers. Time and circumstance have marched on. You don't have to wait for one set day in the time of man to turn over a new leaf. All things in Christ are new. That is the advantage that we have as being children of God. God has been telling us to believe it. God has been telling us to receive it. Yet here we still sit in the same rut, waiting on New Year's resolution. Leave it to God because it can't come back. Give it to God and forget about it. In Lamentations 3:22 and 23 says, it is of the Lord's mercies that we are not consumed, because his compassions fail not. They are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. Now my question to you and to me and to all of us, do we believe it or do we not? The only one standing in the way of our mercies every day and our new outcomes is us. If we want different results, we need to ask God to change our mindset. We need to ask God to change our way of thinking. We need to ask God to help us have his will to be our will. If our will becomes his will, we will be caught up with the S-O-N. We won't have to scurry around trying to make up time that we don't have, because we'll be right in the time zone for whatever, for whomever, or for whenever, because God will always be in control.
Hallelujah.
God bless you.